What if a simple act of kindness in a dimly lit corner booth of the Sunrise Diner forever altered the course of two lives, connected by nothing more than a worn laminated menu and a mother's need? When Tanisha stepped over to table 9, she had no way of knowing the frail elderly woman struggling to read was connected to one of the most powerful men in America, or that her small gesture of compassion would cost her the job she desperately needed, but unlock a door she never knew existed. The fluorescent sign of Sunrise Diner flickered against the pale morning sky as Tanisha Washington rushed across the cracked parking lot, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles left by the night's rain. Her uniform smelled faintly of the lavender detergent she had used at the laundromat just hours earlier, after finishing her night shift at the convenience store across town. The brass bell above the door announced her arrival at 5:57 a.m., 3 precious minutes before her shift officially began, but not early enough to escape the disapproving glare of Mr. Jenkins, who stood behind the counter with his perpetually stained apron and thinning comb-over. The morning light filtered through dusty Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the worn linoleum floor that Tanisha had mopped just yesterday. She could feel the familiar ache in her lower back as she tied her apron strings, the pain a constant companion after 14 months of double shifts. Mr. Jenkins made his way toward her, coffee breath preceding him as he reminded her this was her final warning about cutting it close, seemingly oblivious to the dark circles beneath her eyes or how her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Tanisha nodded respectfully, swallowing the explanation about the bus running late again, knowing excuses only irritated him further no matter how valid. The diner was modest but clean, with its 70s wood panelling and vinyl booths in desperate need of reupholstering, yet Tanisha had meticulously wiped down every laminated menu and filled every sugar dispenser before leaving last night. As she moved to her assigned section, she discreetly checked her phone to see if Marcus had texted about his pre-calculus test, her heart swelling with pride despite her fatigue when she saw his message about feeling confident. Her little brother was only 17, but already accepted to State University with a partial scholarship that covered tuition but nothing else, the remainder becoming Tanisha's responsibility after their parents died in the pile-up on Interstate 40 2 winters ago. The college fund their father had started was quickly depleted by funeral expenses and the outstanding mortgage, leaving Tanisha at 24 to become both mother and father to her brother while deferring her own business administration degree indefinitely. She slipped her phone back into her pocket as Mr. Jenkins shouted for her to take a fresh pot of coffee to her section, mentally calculating how many hours of tips it would take to cover Marcus's textbooks for fall semester. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible yoke. But she straightened her spine and summoned a genuine smile as she approached her first customers, refusing to let them see anything but warmth and welcome in her expression. This job, along with her night shifts, stood between Marcus and his dreams, between honouring her parents' wishes and failure, and Tanisha Washington was many things, but never one to fail those who depended on her, no matter how heavy her own burdens might be. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favour? Please subscribe to our channel, it truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like, and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The quiet rhythm of the morning service was interrupted by the purr of a midnight blue Lincoln town car, gliding to a stop directly before the diner's entrance, its polished surface reflecting the sunrise sign like a dark mirror. Through the streaked front windows, Tanisha paused mid-coffee, as an imposingly tall chauffeur in a crisp black uniform emerged, his white gloves pristine against the dark vehicle as he opened the rear passenger door with practiced precision. With gentle reverence, he helped an elderly woman from the back seat, her movements deliberate and uncertain, one hand clutching an intricately carved wooden cane, while the other gripped his steady arm. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant chignon, her pearl earrings catching the morning light with subtle iridescence that matched the understated luxury of her cashmere sweater and tailored wool pants, clothing that whispered money rather than shouted it. The chauffeur guided her carefully to the entrance before leaning down to speak softly in her ear, his respectful nod contrasting with her slight frown, as she waved him away with surprising authority for someone so physically fragile. Tanisha watched as the woman hesitated at the threshold, her free hand extended slightly forward in a tentative gesture, her clouded eyes moving but not focusing, revealing her blindness as surely as the distinctive red-tipped white cane she clutched. The elderly woman raised her chin with unmistakable dignity. A queen entering unfamiliar territory rather than an ordinary customer, stepping into a roadside diner with its scent of bacon grease and cheap coffee. Several patrons glanced up from their breakfasts, the incongruity of her presence impossible to ignore amid the vinyl booths and plastic menus, like finding an orchid blooming in a vacant lot. Tanisha observed the woman navigate through the entrance with careful determination, noting how her pearl necklace probably cost more than 6 months of diner wages, how her leather handbag could cover a semester of Marcus's textbooks, how the diamond on her right hand could erase their mounting medical bills from when Marcus broke his leg last winter. Yet there was something unexpectedly vulnerable in the way the woman stood, seemingly alone despite her wealth. Her unseeing eyes searching for assistance no amount of money could buy in that moment. Mr. Jenkins appeared unmoved by the newcomer, too busy berating the new fry cook about wasted eggs to notice, as the hostess led the blind woman to a corner booth within Tanisha's section. 2 worlds were colliding in the humid air of the Sunrise Diner, separated by wealth, age, and circumstance, yet breathing the same slightly greasy air, their paths crossing in this unremarkable building on an ordinary Tuesday that suddenly seemed charged with unexpected possibility as the elderly woman settled herself into the cracked vinyl booth with the careful grace of someone accustomed to much finer surroundings. Tanisha emerged from the kitchen balancing plates along her forearm with practiced skill when she noticed the elderly woman in booth 9 struggling with her menu, holding it mere inches from her face with trembling hands, her clouded eyes squinting with such intense concentration that deep furrows formed between her silver brows. The laminated menu shook slightly in her grip as she tilted it toward the weak overhead light, her frustration evident in the tight press of her lips and the slight flush rising along her neck despite her dignified demeanour. The other servers bustled past, Darlene too occupied with her regulars at the counter to notice, and Jim deliberately avoiding the corner section as he always did during busy hours, claiming the tips weren't worth the extra step. Heaviness settled in Tanisha's chest as she watched the woman's fingers trace the plastic surface, seeking words she couldn't quite capture, her independence slipping away in this small moment of defeat that no one else seemed to witness or care about. Setting down her orders at table 7 with a quick smile, Tanisha made her way across the diner, navigating between chairs and outstretched legs, aware that Mr. Jenkins was watching from behind the register with his perpetual scowl of disapproval for any server who spent too long with a single customer. The clattering of forks against plates, the hiss of the grill, and the steady hum of morning conversation seemed to dim as Tanisha approached the booth, her focus narrowing to this stranger whose dignity remained intact despite her obvious difficulty. With gentle care not to startle the woman, Tanisha spoke as she reached the table, her voice warm and respectful, offering a simple human kindness that required nothing but time she didn't have to spare. The woman's head lifted at the sound, her clouded eyes not quite meeting Tanisha's, but turning toward her voice like a flower seeking light, surprise and relief washing across her features as Tanisha offered to read the entire menu to her, section by section, describing not just the items but adding small details about which dishes the cook prepared best and which ones paired well together. Something in the elderly woman's expression softened, the carefully maintained facade of self-sufficiency momentarily replaced by genuine gratitude as she placed the menu down and folded her hands atop it, her sterling silver bracelet catching the light as she nodded her acceptance. Tanisha slid into the opposite bench, their knees almost touching beneath the table, creating a small island of connection amid the swirling current of diner activity around them. She began reading in a clear, unhurried voice, despite knowing Mr. Jenkins would add this to his mental list of her transgressions, her brother's tuition momentarily less important than preserving this woman's dignity in a world that moved too quickly to notice such quiet struggles. Time seemed to suspend itself around booth 9, the universe of the diner continuing its orbit, while these 2 strangers, divided by age and circumstance yet connected by this simple human moment, shared something more nourishing than any item on the faded plastic menu Tanisha now held between them. The elderly woman listened with surprising attentiveness as Tanisha described each breakfast option, her clouded eyes remaining fixed in Tanisha's general direction, while her weathered hands rested primly atop the table, occasionally lifting to touch the pearls at her throat when something particularly appealed to her. When Tanisha finished the breakfast section and paused to ensure the woman was following along, a warm smile transformed the refined face, softening the aristocratic cheekbones and bringing unexpected youth to her expression as she introduced herself as Margaret, her voice carrying the polished enunciation of old money and proper schooling. Margaret confided that this excursion was an act of rebellion, having insisted her driver leave her alone despite her son's strict instructions to the contrary, her tone revealing both amusement at her small defiance and a touch of melancholy that spoke of diminishing freedoms as her sight continued to fade. Her fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop as she explained how weary she had grown of being supervised every moment since her diagnosis, how desperately she missed the simple pleasure of sitting in a restaurant by herself with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, pleasures now relegated to memory along with driving her own car and reading her beloved gardening books. Tanisha felt an unexpected connection bloom between them, as Margaret's vulnerability revealed the universal human desire for dignity and independence that transcended their obvious differences in circumstance. Without conscious decision, Tanisha began sharing that her grandmother had particularly loved the blueberry pancakes here, adding cinnamon to her coffee instead of sugar, a habit Tanisha had inherited along with her grandmother's collection of church hats and steadfast belief that kindness cost nothing but paid everything forward. Margaret's face brightened at the mention of blueberry pancakes, revealing they had been her late husband's favourite Sunday breakfast, a tradition she had maintained for years after his passing until her vision made cooking too hazardous. Their conversation meandered through small, meaningful details of lives otherwise unknown to each other, Margaret describing her garden of fragrant herbs she could still tend by touch and smell, while Tanisha shared anecdotes about her brother's determination to become an engineer despite their circumstances. When Margaret finally decided on blueberry pancakes with extra butter and coffee with cinnamon rather than sugar, she reached across the table with uncanny accuracy to touch Tanisha's hand, her fingers cool and light as butterfly wings against Tanisha's warm skin, as she thanked her for something far more significant than menu assistance. The genuine connection glowed between them, momentarily suspending the reality that one would return to a mansion, while the other would work another 8-hour shift before heading to her second job, their worlds briefly intersecting through shared experiences of love and loss and simple human decency. Tanisha squeezed Margaret's hand gently before rising to place the order, ignoring Mr. Jenkins' pointed glare from across the diner, knowing that some moments justified whatever consequences might follow. Some connections mattered more than paychecks or protocols, and some acts of kindness nourished the giver as much as the receiver, a truth her grandmother had embedded in her heart long before the hardships of adulthood had threatened to callous it over. The peaceful bubble surrounding Booth 9 burst when Mr. Jenkins intercepted Tanisha on her way to the kitchen, his meaty hand clamping around her upper arm with enough force to leave fingerprint bruises as he pulled her into the narrow service corridor beside the restrooms, the smell of industrial cleaner failing to mask years of grease trapped in the walls. His voice remained low, but vibrated with the particular cruelty he reserved for staff he considered expendable. His coffee-stained teeth bared in what barely passed as a smile, while he reminded Tanisha that her job was to serve paying customers efficiently, not play charity companion to old ladies who would leave $3 and occupy a table for hours. Flecks of spittle landed on Tanisha's cheek as he emphasized that another incident of table favoritism would result in immediate termination, his small eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of exercising the limited power his position afforded him over people with even fewer options than himself. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an agitated insect as Tanisha stood perfectly still, neither backing away nor challenging his authority directly, maintaining the careful balance that survival in minimum wage America required, knowing that each paycheck stood between Marcus and his education, between keeping their small apartment and joining the growing homeless encampment beneath the highway overpass. She absorbed the verbal lashing with outward calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs and heat rose along her neck, the familiar childhood prayer for invisibility resurfacing as it always did in moments of humiliation. When Mr. Janitor Jenkins finally released her, with a warning that her final strike had been used, Tanisha straightened her rumpled sleeve and returned to the dining area, only to find Margaret sitting with unusual stiffness in the booth, her unseeing eyes wide with distress, and her hand clutched tightly around her cane, having heard enough of the manager's tirade to understand the situation despite his attempt at discretion. The elegant woman's lips trembled slightly as she asked if Tanisha was into trouble. Because of her, genuine concern threading through her cultured voice, revealing a compassion that her privileged life had not eroded. Tanisha swallowed the knot of humiliation in her throat and assured Margaret that everything was fine, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill, unwilling to burden this kind stranger with the precariousness of her employment, or how desperately she needed every dollar this job provided. Margaret reached across the table with surprising accuracy to catch Tanisha's wrist, her touch gentle but insistent as she sensed the younger woman's distress beneath her reassurances, creating another moment of connection that transcended their circumstances. Two women recognizing in each other the familiar struggle to maintain dignity in an often undignified world. The unfairness of the situation settled around Tanisha's shoulders like a familiar weight as she carefully extracted herself with promises to return with fresh coffee, knowing her entire future balanced on pleasing a man who took pleasure in asserting dominance over those with no recourse, yet equally unwilling to diminish the simple human kindness she had offered to Margaret, recognizing that surrendering such moments would cost something far more valuable than the job itself. A sudden shift in the diner atmosphere pulled Tanisha from her conversation with Margaret, the ambient clatter of silverware and morning chatter falling into unusual silence like a record abruptly unplugged. The front door swung open with authoritative force, admitting a tall figure whose presence seemed to physically alter the air pressure within the modest establishment, causing patrons to straighten unconsciously in their seats and servers to freeze mid-motion. The man stood framed in the doorway for a calculated moment, sunlight glinting off his platinum watch and custom Italian shoes that cost more than most patrons earned in a month, his tailored charcoal suit bearing the unmistakable precision of Savile Row craftsmanship. His cold appraisal of the diner carried the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to assigning monetary value to everything within his field of vision, from the outdated decor to the humans occupying the space. Whispers rippled across the restaurant like a breeze through summer grass as recognition dawned. Patrons nudging each other and surreptitiously reaching for phones, the name Alexander Richards passing from table to table with the reverent fear reserved for modern royalty. The tech billionaire whose ruthless acquisition strategies had collapsed entire companies overnight, whose artificial intelligence patents had revolutionized industries while displacing thousands of workers, whose divorce settlement had made international headlines for its unprecedented cruelty, soared incongruously amid the vinyl and formica of Sunrise Diner, his presence as startling as finding a shark in a goldfish pond. Mr. Jenkins emerged from behind the counter with alarming speed, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to approach the billionaire. His previous scowl transformed into a grotesque smile that displayed every coffee-stained tooth while he wiped his perspiring forehead with a napkin. Alexander Richards dismissed the manager with an imperceptible flick of his manicured fingers, his glacial blue eyes scanning the diner with laser focus until they locked onto the corner booth where Margaret sat, unaware of the commotion, still smiling at something Tanisha had said while stirring cinnamon into her coffee. The diner remained suspended in collective-held breath as Richards began moving toward the booth with purposeful strides, every head turning to follow his progress except Tanisha, who continued attending to Margaret with genuine warmth, pouring fresh coffee with one hand while sitting the elderly woman's cup with the other. Completely oblivious to the identity of the approaching figure or his connection to her kind customer. The dramatic irony hung heavy in the greasy diner air as Tanisha laughed softly at Margaret's comment about the cinnamon, reminding her of Christmas mornings, unaware that the man whose cold shadow now fell across their table controlled assets exceeding the GDP of several small nations, unaware that the gentle blind woman whose dignity she had protected was the mother of a man known for destroying careers without remorse, unaware that her simple act of kindness was being observed by someone with the power to irrevocably alter her life trajectory with a single phone call or financial transaction, the universe converging extraordinary circumstances upon this ordinary moment in a roadside diner where blueberry pancakes and human decency had momentarily bridged worlds never meant to intersect. Alexander Richards remained unacknowledged at the edge of the booth, an unusual experience for a man whose presence typically commanded immediate attention and deference. Yet neither woman noticed him, as Tanisha carefully described the placement of the blueberry pancakes using clock positions to help Margaret navigate her plate independently. With practiced ease that spoke of similar assistance provided to someone else in her life, Tanisha demonstrated how to locate the butter pooling in the centre and the syrup already applied in the spiral pattern Margaret had requested, her movements efficient yet respectful of the older woman's dignity. The tech mogul stood perfectly still, his normally demanding presence deliberately subdued as he observed the young waitress gently place the knife and fork in Margaret's hands, then guide them to the correct positions before allowing the elderly woman to take over, maintaining the illusion of independence while providing just enough support to ensure success. Richards noted the strategic positioning of the water glass, the extra napkins placed within easy reach, the subtle ways this minimum wage server anticipated needs his mother's expensive caretakers often missed, despite their extensive training and exorbitant salaries. A shadow of recognition flickered across his features when Margaret struggled with cutting the pancakes one-handed while holding her fork steady, and without fanfare or asking permission, Tanisha seamlessly assisted by steadying the plate and offering to cut the pancakes into manageable bites, transforming potential embarrassment into casual conversation by launching into an amusing story about her brother Marcus accidentally using salt instead of sugar in his first attempt at pancakes for her birthday. Richards watched as his mother laughed genuinely for the first time in months, the sound startling in its authenticity compared to her usual carefully modulated social chuckle, her clouded eyes crinkling with mirth as Tanisha described her brother's mortified expression and their subsequent emergency breakfast picnic of store-bought cookies in the backyard. The billion-dollar acquisition pending on Richard's phone momentarily receded from his consciousness as he observed something rarer than the exclusive commodities he collected, something his vast resources consistently failed to procure for his mother since her vision began failing 2 years ago, her increasing isolation matched only by his growing frustration at being unable to solve her unhappiness with his unlimited financial power. The impenetrable mask he presented to business adversaries and media outlets that shifted almost imperceptibly, the glacial calculation in his eyes briefly thawing as Tanisha demonstrated the location of each item on the table again, ensuring Margaret could enjoy her meal with minimal assistance going forward. The waitress's genuine kindness offered, without knowledge of who Margaret was or what connection she possessed, without agenda or expectation of return. The power dynamic in the small booth began its subtle inversion as Alexander Richards, accustomed to evaluating everything and everyone in terms of utility and leverage, found himself re-evaluating the young woman in the faded uniform whose wealth could be measured in different currencies than those that dominated his existence, whose quiet competence and natural compassion accomplished what his billions had not, whose value suddenly could not be calculated on any spreadsheet or algorithm his companies had ever developed, introducing an unfamiliar uncertainty to a man who had built an empire on absolute conviction in his own judgment of worth. Mr. Jenkins materialized beside Alexander with the sudden desperation of a drowning man spotting a life raft. His entire demeanor transformed from tyrannical overseer to fawning sycophant as recognition dawned across his florid features. Sweat beaded visibly along his receding hairline as he inserted himself between Richards and the booth, offering effusive apologies for any wait the distinguished gentleman might have experienced, promising the best table in the establishment along with complimentary breakfast despite their diner possessing neither a reservation system nor a policy of free meals. The manager's voice pitched unnaturally high as he bombarded Richards with obsequious commentary about following his remarkable career and revolutionary business strategies, even claiming to have invested early in Richards' technologies despite his salary making such an investment impossible, his words tumbling over one another in a frantic bid to establish himself as worthy of notice. Alexander observed the performance with clinical detachment, his expression suggesting he was cataloguing yet another predictable human reaction to his wealth rather than listening to the actual content of the manager's breathless monologue. Without shifting his gaze from the booth where Tanisha now stood frozen in realization, Richards dismissed Mr. Jenkins with 5 coldly precise words that carried absolute authority despite their moderate volume, the manager deflating visibly as he retreated with the instinctive submission of prey recognizing an apex predator. Margaret tilted her head at the sound of her son's voice, her entire countenance brightening with genuine pleasure as she extended her hand in his general direction, her clouded eyes animated with an enthusiasm Tanisha had not witnessed during their previous interaction. The elderly woman immediately began recounting her morning adventure with undisguised delight, specifically praising the exceptional young waitress who had made her feel normal and capable again, who had read the entire menu without rushing, who understood about adding cinnamon to coffee, who shared stories about her clever brother studying engineering, her words tumbling out with girlish enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with her previous dignified reserve. Tanisha remained rooted beside the table as comprehension crashed over her in waves, connecting the elegant blind woman to the notorious billionaire whose features regularly dominated business news and social media, whose controversial labour practices had been the subject of her brother's ethics paper last semester, whose net worth exceeded the combined lifetime earnings of everyone she had ever known. The uniform she had meticulously ironed suddenly felt painfully inadequate, the pancake syrup stain on her sensible shoes glaringly obvious, her carefully applied drugstore makeup insufficient armour for this unexpected collision of worlds. Heat climbed her neck toward her cheeks as she became acutely conscious of every inadequacy from her scuffed name tag to her unpaid electric bill, from her community college transcript to her broken-down Toyota waiting in the back parking lot, the weight of socio-economic reality crushing the brief human connection she had formed with Margaret beneath the inescapable disparities now personified in the imposing figure of Alexander Richards, whose calculating gaze assessed her with the same algorithmic precision that had determined the fate of entire corporate divisions throughout his ruthless ascent to power. Mr. Mencken seized the opportunity like a desperate gambler placing his final bet, sidling back to the booth with renewed confidence as he interpreted Alexander Richards' presence as tacit permission to reassert his authority through a public display of managerial decisiveness. Positioning himself strategically in Richards' line of sight, Jenkins launched into a performance of righteous indignation, falsely claiming that Tanisha had neglected her entire section of the customers for over 40 minutes to focus exclusively on Margaret, suggesting with oily insinuation that she had recognized an opportunity to extract generous tips from a vulnerable wealthy woman. His voice carried deliberately throughout the now silent diner as he embellished his fabrication, claiming multiple customer complaints that morning about cold food and empty coffee cups, while Tanisha monopolized the blind woman with unnecessary attention and personal stories. The accusation hung in the greasy diner air like toxic smoke as Jenkins pronounced the words that transformed Tanisha's economic precarity into freefall, informing her that her employment was terminated effective immediately. His tone carrying the vindictive satisfaction of a petty tyrant exercising the full measure of his limited power. Tanisha attempted to defend herself, her voice steady despite the panic surging through her bloodstream, explaining that she had maintained her other tables while assisting Margaret, pointing out that no customers had complained or left without paying, her words emerging with the clarity of truth against Jenkins' theatrical falsehoods. The manager spoke over her protest with practiced ease, immune to logical contradiction through years of unchallenged authority, instructing her to collect her final check next week after he calculated the cost of the excessive time she had spent with Margaret instead of productive work. Margaret's face crumpled with distress as she realized her desire for independence had cost someone their livelihood, her hands trembling as she reached unsuccessfully for Tanisha, her privileged existence having insulated her from witnessing such naked injustice firsthand, despite her blindness, now ironically allowing her to hear the cruelty that sighted people might miss beneath professional veneers. The colour drained from Tanisha's face as the implications cascaded through her consciousness, each consequence multiplying exponentially with the weight of her responsibilities. The tuition payment due next week, the electricity bill already carrying a late fee, her brother's medication needing refill by Friday, the rent increase notice taped to their apartment door, the dwindling prospects of immediate employment in their struggling community, and the absolute impossibility of maintaining her brother's enrollment without steady income. Throughout the manager's performance and Tanisha's measured defense, Alexander Richards observed the scene with sphinx-like impassivity, his expression revealing nothing beyond clinical assessment, the same expression he wore while evaluating failing companies before acquisition, the same calculated neutrality that had made his poker face legendary in Silicon Valley negotiations, his silence neither endorsing Jenkins' cruelty nor intervening to prevent it, his presence simultaneously central to and removed from the unfolding human drama that would barely register as a footnote in his expansive world while representing catastrophic upheaval in Tanisha's modest existence. Tanisha absorbed the finality of her situation with remarkable composure, years of shouldering responsibility beyond her age having forged an outward dignity that betrayed none of the seismic panic erupting beneath her calm exterior. With deliberate movements that reclaimed the moment from Mr. Jenkins' gloating supervision, she untied her apron and folded it with precise creases, setting it on the counter rather than surrendering it directly to his outstretched hand, a small act of resistance that went unnoticed by everyone except Margaret. whose unseeing eyes somehow track the sound with unusual attentiveness. The diner remained suspended in uncomfortable silence as Tanisha gathered her meagre belongings from beneath the counter, the other servers avoiding eye contact while continuing to mechanically wipe tables and refill coffees, their own precarious employment forcing complicity through silence. With her shoulders squared and chin lifted, Tanisha approached the booth one final time, her voice steady as she thanked Margaret for their conversation, expressing genuine pleasure at having met her and wishing her a wonderful day, no trace of resentment or accusation contaminating the sincerity of her farewell, despite the catastrophic consequences of their innocent interaction. Margaret reached out with trembling fingers, finding Tanisha's hand with surprising accuracy and squeezing it with distress evident in her refined features, her whispered apology carrying the helpless awareness of privilege confronting powerlessness without the vocabulary to bridge the chasm between intention and impact. Tanisha squeezed back gently before releasing the elderly woman's hand, her exit from the diner marked by neither dramatic declaration nor visible emotion, just the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to absorbing life's blows without the luxury of public breakdown. The morning sunshine struck her face with cruel brightness as the diner door swung shut behind her, the parking lot stretching before her with daunting emptiness, each step toward her rusted Toyota carrying her further from financial stability and closer to the impossibility of maintaining the careful balance of obligations that defined her existence. The protective facade crumbled on Uni when she reached her car, the vehicle representing both escape and trap as she fumbled with keys is suddenly rendered unwieldy by trembling fingers, the full impact of her situation finally penetrating her emotional defenses with the force of a physical blow. Her composure shattered completely once inside the privacy of her car, tears streaming unchecked down her face as harsh sobs tore from her throat. Her forehead pressed against the steering wheel as calculations of survival tumbled through her mind with merciless precision, each sum coming up devastatingly short against the reality of rent on utilities, groceries, and most crucially, her brother's tuition payment due in exactly 9 days. The crushing unfairness collapsed upon her with the weight of endless similar injustices she had witnessed and endured, where simple human kindness carried penalties too severe for those without financial cushioning, where arbitrary authority remained unchecked by accountability, where her brother's bright future now faced the same systematic barriers that had derailed her own education 3 years earlier, perpetuating the cycle her parents had sacrificed everything to help their children escape, all because she had chosen to preserve the dignity of a stranger over the capricious rules of minimum wage employment. Tanisha emerged from her third failed job interview in as many days, her professional smile evaporating the moment she exited the convenience store, where the manager had kindly interviewed her, despite having no actual openings, her sensible pumps pinching her feet as she trudged toward the bus stop in the punishing afternoon heat. The weight of her phone felt suddenly foreign against her hip as it vibrated with an incoming call, the screen displaying an unfamiliar number with a prestigious downtown area code reserved for corporate headquarters and luxury condominiums, places Tanisha encountered only when passing through to cleaning jobs or food deliveries. She answered with cautious professionalism despite the hammering of her heart, expecting perhaps a response from one of the 27 applications she had submitted online during sleepless midnight hours between job searches and reassuring her increasingly anxious brother about their financial situation. The crisp female voice on the other end carried the polished efficiency associated with executive assistants, identifying herself as representing Alexander Richards' office and requesting Tanisha's presence for a meeting at Richards Tower tomorrow morning at precisely 9 o'clock. The unexpected connection to events 3 days prior sending a jolt of adrenaline through Tanisha's exhausted system. Her mind raced through possibilities ranging from potential legal action for disturbing Margaret to some elaborate humiliation orchestrated by the billionaire whose reputation for creative vengeance against perceived opponents featured regularly in business publications. None of her hypotheses including scenarios beneficial to her increasingly desperate circumstances. The assistant continued with practiced detachment, explaining that a car would collect Tanisha at 8:15 from her residence, providing the exact address without requesting confirmation, the casual display of information access reminding Tanisha of the vast power differential separating her world from Richard's sphere of influence. Suspicion wrestled with desperation as Tanisha considered declining, pride urging protection from further humiliation while responsibility demanded exploration of any opportunity, no matter how unlikely, that might preserve her brother's education now hanging by the increasingly frayed thread of her rapidly diminishing savings. The assistant waited with professional patience as Tanisha deliberated, adding with carefully neutral tone that Mr. Richards had specifically mentioned the meeting concerned events at Sunrise Diner and would require approximately 30 minutes of her time, for which she would be compensated at a consulting rate regardless of outcome. The unexpected financial consideration tipping Tanisha's decision toward acceptance despite her lingering wariness. After confirming the arrangement with a steadiness she did not feel, Tanisha lowered the phone and stared unseeingly at the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet, the universe having thrown yet another unpredictable element into her path, the mysterious summons simultaneously kindling a dangerous flicker of hope while triggering the protective skepticism developed through years of watching promised opportunities dissolve into disappointments. That evening she pressed her only interview outfit and researched Alexander Richards obsessively online, reading about his ruthless business tactics and legendary negotiating skills with the determination of someone preparing for battle, while carefully avoiding mention of the meeting to Marcus, unwilling to burden him with either false hope or additional anxiety until she understood what tomorrow might bring. Her dreams that night filled with towering glass buildings and endless elevators leading to offices, where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made, with the casual ease of moving digital assets across glowing screens, her subconscious preparing her for collision with a world operating by rules she had never been taught, but would nevertheless be judged by. Richards Tower thrust into the morning sky with unapologetic dominance, 97 stories of gleaming glass and cutting-edge sustainable materials that reflected clouds and captured sunlight with engineered precision. Its distinctive helix design frequently featured in architectural magazines and international skyline photographs. The private car deposited Tanisha at a discreet side entrance reserved for special visitors, the driver directing her toward a security desk where her identification was already expected, her photograph already appearing on the guard's screen before she presented her license. The frictionless efficiency both impressive and unsettling as she received a temporary access badge without completing a single form or verbal explanation. The dedicated elevator ascended with such smooth rapidity that Tanisha felt her stomach remain somewhere around the 30th floor, while her body continued upward, the glass enclosure offering increasingly panoramic views of the city she had lived in her entire life, yet never seen from this godlike perspective. Familiar landmarks reduced to miniature dioramas, while invisible neighborhoods like her own disappeared entirely beneath the curated viewscape designed for those who controlled, rather than inhabited, urban spaces. Elegant employees populated the executive floor with purposeful movements and identical expressions of measured ambition, their designer clothing and confident postures creating a uniform sea of corporate success through which Tanisha navigated with acute awareness of her carefully mended blazer and single pair of professional heels, purchased second-hand for her community college graduation 3 years earlier. The executive assistant materialized with choreographed timing to escort her through a labyrinth of glass-walled offices and collaborative spaces where casually dressed young professionals manipulated data visualizations on transparent screens with graceful and hand gestures, their workspace resembling a high-budget science fiction set rather than an actual corporate environment, the technological gap between this world and Tanisha's daily reality expanding her sense of dislocation with each step deeper into Richard's domain. The chameleon-like walls of Alexander Richards' private office adjusted their transparency upon their entrance, shifting from clear glass to frosted privacy as the assistant departed with silent efficiency, leaving Tanisha standing before the man himself as he rose from behind a desk apparently carved from a single massive slab of sustainable bamboo, its surface devoid of papers or visible technology despite controlling enterprises spanning continents. Alexander gestured toward a chair positioned to enjoy the vertigo-inducing city view while offering surprisingly ordinary coffee from an elegant carafe, the casual hospitality momentarily disorienting after the highly orchestrated processional leading to this encounter. Without preamble or small talk, Richard stated with dispassionate clarity that he had witnessed everything at the diner 3 days prior, his words unlocking the realization that his arrival had preceded his approach to the booth, allowing him to observe Tanisha's interaction with Margaret without her knowledge. His invisible assessment having continued through Jenkins' manufactured accusations and her subsequent termination. The billionaire described with unexpected detail her patient assistance with the menu, her strategic positioning of items within Margaret's reach, her genuine interest in his mother's stories, and most significantly, her preservation of the elderly woman's dignity throughout their interaction, his precise observations carrying neither judgment nor condescension, but rather the analytical appreciation of someone recognizing exceptional quality regardless of packaging. With the same matter-of-fact delivery he might use to describe market projections, Richards explained that his mother had been increasingly withdrawing since her vision began deteriorating, refusing social engagements and rejecting the independence-focused therapies her doctors recommended, her depression concerning him more than her physical limitation. Yet in 20 minutes of unexceptional diner conversation, Tanisha had accomplished what specialists charging thousands per session had failed to achieve over months, reigniting his mother's desire for engagement with the outside world through nothing more complicated than basic human kindness and recognition of her personhood beyond her disability. Alexander transitioned to his proposal with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to transactions rather than conversations, his words precise and his offer structured with the clarity of a contract already formulated in his mind. He explained that his foundation, the Richards Initiative for Educational Access, maintained a fellowship program for promising students facing financial barriers, with positions available for qualified mentors to provide guidance alongside the financial support, his tone suggesting this arrangement represented a logical business solution rather than an emotional response to witnessing injustice. The position would provide salary and benefits exceeding anything available in Tanisha's current job market, while covering Marcus' educational expenses completely, including housing and the graduate studies his exceptional grades warranted, the comprehensive nature of the offer hanging in the rarefied air between them, like an object too valuable to touch without permission. Tanisha absorbed the proposal with outward stillness that masked her internal turbulence, the solution to her most pressing problems materializing with suspicious convenience, triggering the protective skepticism developed through years of watching seemingly miraculous opportunities reveal hidden exploitation beneath their shiny exteriors. Her response emerged measured but direct, questioning whether this extraordinary offer represented genuine recognition of skill or merely an elaborate form of charity designed to satisfy a billionaire's momentary guilt after witnessing the consequences of inequality he ultimately benefited from and helped perpetuate through his business practices. The challenge hung between them like an unexpected obstacle in Richard's carefully constructed narrative, his momentary silence and recalibrating gaze suggesting few people questioned his generosity so directly or identified the potential power dynamics underlying his philanthropic gestures. Their fundamental worldviews collided in the glass-enclosed space suspended above the city, Tanisha articulating her wariness of solutions that addressed individual symptoms while leaving systemic problems intact, questioning whether temporary rescue of two specific people represented meaningful change or merely exceptional status granted through arbitrary billionaire benevolence. Her words carrying the weight of community conversations about sustainability versus charity, about dignity versus dependence, about justice versus selective kindness. Alexander countered with unexpected candor, acknowledging the systemic critique while defending his foundation's approach of identifying exceptional individuals who could subsequently create broader change within their communities, suggesting that pragmatism required working within existing systems while simultaneously attempting their transformation, his perspective shaped by leveraging limited resources for maximum impact rather than pursuing ideological purity without practical effect. The tension between them crystallized around fundamentally different experiences of the same economic system, Richards viewing it as an imperfect mechanism capable of incremental improvement through strategic intervention, Tanisha experiencing it as a deliberately constructed obstacle course designed to exhaust those not born with advantages. Their perspectives shaped by positions on opposite sides of barriers neither had personally constructed yet, both navigated daily. The philosophical clash transformed the luxurious office into unexpected intellectual territory where power dynamics temporarily shifted, Richards accustomed to employees agreeing enthusiastically with his proposals rather than questioning their fundamental premises, Tanisha's challenge elevating her from charity recipient to equal participant in defining the terms of their potential relationship, their conversation expanding beyond immediate circumstance to encompass questions of obligation, opportunity, and the complex intersection of individual agency and structural constraint, neither fully convincing the other, yet both recognizing the validity underlying their opposing perspectives. A subtle shift occurred in Alexander's demeanour as their philosophical debate reached its natural conclusion without clear resolution, his precisely calibrated corporate posture yielding slightly to a more human positioning as he set aside his untouched coffee and gazed momentarily toward the window, though his focus clearly extended far beyond the cityscape sprawling beneath them. For the first time since their encounter began, he spoke without the practiced efficiency that characterized his professional communication, his voice carrying a quieter quality as he revealed that Margaret had been experiencing accelerating decline over the past 18 months, her deteriorating vision coinciding with withdrawal from her extensive social and philanthropic engagements despite having resources for any accommodation imaginable. The technical problem of her blindness had been addressed with typical Richard's thoroughness. The finest specialists consulted, the most advanced treatments attempted, their home retrofitted with cutting-edge assistive technology, a team of professional caregivers hired to ensure her physical needs received immediate attention. Yet none of these expensive solutions had prevented her retreat into increasing isolation and dependence. With unexpected rawness, Alexander admitted that watching Tanisha interact with his mother had forced him to confront his own failure to distinguish between managing Margaret's care and preserving her dignity, his approach to her condition having been identical to his corporate problem-solving methodology, identifying symptoms, implementing solutions, measuring outcomes, without recognizing that his algorithmic efficiency stripped away the essential humanity his mother craved more than perfect physical assistance. The billionaire's voice carried an unfamiliar hesitation as he acknowledged that Tanisha had done through natural instinct what his expensive professionals had failed to accomplish through training, helping Margaret navigate her limitation without making it her defining characteristic, treating her blindness as a logistical detail rather than an identity, preserving her sense of self beyond her disability through genuine connection rather than perfunctory accommodation. The stark vulnerability displayed by this titan of industry created an unexpected bridge across their socio-economic divide, his struggle to care properly for his mother, revealing the universal challenge of honouring aging parents, his sophisticated resources proving ultimately inadequate against the fundamental human need for dignity and connection, his power and privilege offering no advantage in maintaining the delicate balance between assistance and respect with someone he genuinely loved. Tanisha recognized in his confession the echo of her own journey with her grandmother before her passing, the careful navigation between necessary help and preserving independence, the strategic placement of items within reach, the casual conversation that normalized adaptive strategies without drawing attention to them, the constant awareness that maintaining someone's spirit required more nuanced attention than merely maintaining their physical comfort. Their shared understanding transcended their disparate circumstances, creating momentary equality through common human experience where artificial hierarchies briefly dissolved. Alexander's carefully cultivated public image giving way to the more complicated reality of a son struggling with his mother's vulnerability, his billions irrelevant against the universal challenge of preserving the dignity of those we care for as their capabilities change, his professional expertise rendered useless in the face of fundamental human needs that Tanisha addressed instinctively through emotional intelligence rather than strategic calculation. Their different worlds temporarily aligned through the shared territory of family obligation and genuine concern for someone beyond themselves. The conversation shifted as Alexander casually referenced additional information his team had gathered about Sunrise Diner, his tone suggesting routine due diligence rather than extraordinary investigation as he mentioned the pattern of employee mistreatment stretching back over Jenkins' 7-year management tenure. With clinical precision, he outlined the documented history of wage theft through manipulated time cards, systematic denial of legally mandated breaks, verbal abuse disproportionately directed toward female and minority staff, and retaliatory firing of anyone attempting to address these violations, the comprehensive assessment delivered with the same detachment he might use to describe an underperforming acquisition target. The files on the digital display he activated with a subtle hand gesture revealed dozens of former employees sharing experiences nearly identical to Tanisha's, their collective suffering transformed into anonymized data points and trend analyses, the human impact of Jenkins' behavior quantified with corporate efficiency that simultaneously acknowledged and sanitized the everyday injustice occurring within the unremarkable diner. Tanisha absorbed this information with growing disquiet, individual faces materializing in her mind to accompany the sterile data. Remembering Louisa's constant fear about being unable to afford insulin if her hours were cut again, Andrew struggled to attend community college, while supporting his younger siblings, Darlene's bruised dignity after enduring Jenkins' verbal assaults about her age and appearance, each person navigating their own private constellation of responsibilities and dreams, while enduring the same systemic abuses she had experienced. The decision crystallized within her with surprising clarity despite the breathtaking opportunity hovering just within reach, her voice steady as she shifted the conversation from her individual circumstances to the broader situation at the diner, asking pointed questions about what would happen to her former co-workers if she simply accepted Alexander's generous offer and moved forward. The inquiry carried implicit challenge, testing whether his concern extended beyond the specific individual who had helped his mother or represented merely selective rescue leaving the underlying problem intact. Her willingness to potentially compromise her extraordinary opportunity revealing character dimensions extending beyond self-interest despite her desperate circumstances. Alexander observed her with recalibrated attention, clearly recognizing that most people in her position would focus exclusively on securing their own advancement rather than leveraging their momentary influence to address others' needs, his expression suggesting she had inadvertently passed some unspoken assessment beyond their previous negotiation. The calculated risk Tanisha took in that moment exposed the essence of her character more clearly than any resume or interview could have accomplished, her instinctive prioritization of community welfare over immediate personal gain occurring without performative virtue signaling or expectation of reward, simply the natural extension of the same person who had taken extra moments to preserve a stranger's dignity despite knowing it might cost her professionally. The tension between self-preservation and moral consistency hung in the air between them, Alexander witnessing firsthand the authentic expression of principles easily claimed during prosperity but rarely maintained during scarcity, Tanisha demonstrating through action rather than rhetoric that her compassion toward Margaret represented her fundamental character rather than situational performance, her advocacy creating genuine risk to her miraculous opportunity yet somehow essential to maintaining her integrity despite the potential consequences, her decision reflecting values Alexander recognized intellectually, but rarely encountered in his experience where transactional relationships dominated and self-interest typically prevailed in moments requiring sacrifice. Alexander responded to Tanisha's moral stand not with the dismissal or irritation she half expected, but with a subtle shift in his assessment, his calculating gaze suggesting he was mentally revising variables in some internal equation regarding her potential value beyond the original parameters he had considered. With practiced casualness that nevertheless failed to completely mask his genuine respect, he revealed that Richards Holdings had already acquired the building housing Sunrise Diner 3 days earlier, through a specialized subsidiary focused on commercial real estate investment in economically transitional neighborhoods, the transaction completed with characteristic efficiency before Tanisha had even reached home after her termination. The information landed between them, with seismic impact despite his deliberate understatement. The casual deployment of resources and influence to permanently alter ownership of an entire property, revealing the breathtaking scope of power differential between their worlds. A billionaire's impulse purchase reorganizing physical reality and economic relationships that shape dozens of lives without their knowledge or input. Alexander continued with measured precision, explaining that the existing management contract provided multiple grounds for immediate termination based on documented violations of labor regulations and health department standards, his legal team having already prepared the necessary documentation awaiting only final authorization, the systematic dismantling of Jenkins' authority proceeding with algorithmic inevitability once set in motion by Richards' initial interest generated through Tanisha's simple act of kindness. The revelation unfolded with increasing momentum as Alexander outlined his expanded proposal, suggesting Tanisha consider joining his foundation in a dual capacity, overseeing both her brother's educational support program and a workplace dignity initiative, using the transformed diner as a pilot location for implementing equitable labor practices, living wages, and career development pathways for employees typically trapped in dead-end service positions. The comprehensive vision extended far beyond her modest advocacy for her former co-workers, transforming the unremarkable diner into a potential model for systematic change within an industry notorious for worker exploitation. the ripple effects extending outward from her small decision to help Margaret navigate a menu with dignity and respect rather than pity or impatience. Tanisha's mind struggled to process the exponential expansion from individual kindness to structural intervention, from helping one person read a menu to potentially reshaping employment standards for an entire community. The connection between her instinctive compassion and Alexander's calculated leverage of resources creating something neither could have accomplished individually, her human-scale decency combining with his system-level influence to produce possibilities exceeding their separate capacities. The truth of what was happening crystallized with stunning clarity, the universe having orchestrated this unlikely intersection of lives through nothing more magical than basic human kindness offered, without expectation of return, creating consequences extending far beyond what she could have imagined when simply helping an elderly woman maintain her dignity over breakfast. The realization washing over her with equal parts disbelief and wonder as Alexander continued outlining potential implementation timelines with characteristic precision. The sheer improbability of these expanding circles of consequence emanating from such an ordinary moment in such an unremarkable place challenged Tanisha's fundamental understanding of how change happens in the world, suggesting that perhaps transformation sometimes begins not through grand gestures or revolutionary actions, but through simple human decency maintained despite inconvenience or potential cost. Her small act of kindness having somehow initiated a sequence of events that might permanently alter dozens of lives beyond her own through the mysterious alchemy of human connection, transcending the artificial barriers of class, wealth, and circumstance. The morning light filtered through spotless windows of the reimagined Sunrise Community Diner, illuminating walls now adorned with local artwork and tables occupied by the diverse cross-section of humanity that comprised their neighborhood. From suited professionals enjoying fair trade coffee to families celebrating special occasions without financial strain. Tanisha moved through the transformed space with confident purpose, her tailored business casual attire reflecting her evolved position, while her genuine warmth with staff maintained connection to her service industry roots. Timbos and Stummuros. Her leadership style balancing professional efficiency with fundamental respect for every person contributing to the diner's success. The physical renovation had been merely the visible manifestation of deeper structural changes, from the comprehensive healthcare benefits unprecedented in small restaurant operations to the education stipends already enabling 3 staff members to pursue community college coursework, from the innovative profit-sharing model giving employees tangible stakes in the business, to the apprenticeship program partnering with local high schools to provide disadvantaged youth with marketable skills and mentorship. Her morning routine now included reviewing the previous day's metrics on the custom management dashboard Alexander's tech team had developed specifically for the pilot program. The detailed analytics tracking not only traditional business performance but also quality of life improvements for staff, community engagement indicators, and educational advancement benchmarks, the multidimensional assessment reflecting the initiative's holistic approach to success beyond mere profitability. Margaret appeared precisely at 10:30 for her standing Tuesday appointment, now navigating confidently with her cane through the familiar space, greeted by staff who genuinely appreciated her presence rather than merely tolerating it. Her growing independence evident in her solo trips to various community engagements facilitated by the specialized transportation service Tanisha had helped develop through the foundation. The friendship between the women had deepened over months of regular interaction, transcending their dramatic first meeting to establish genuine connection built on mutual respect and growing understanding of each other's worlds, their weekly conversations ranging from Tanisha's challenging business school coursework to Margaret's rediscovered passion for accessible gardening, from philosophical discussions about responsibility and privilege to practical strategies for Margaret's increasing community involvement despite her visual limitations. Tanisha checked her watch before joining Margaret, knowing her strategic planning class began in exactly 90 minutes at the university downtown, her educational pathway now unfolding with support that eliminated financial barriers while still requiring her intellectual contribution and dedicated effort, the foundation scholarship covering expenses, but her impressive 3.9 GPA reflecting her own capabilities finally receiving proper nurturing. The weight of constant financial precarity had lifted from her shoulders, allowing her natural leadership abilities and strategic thinking to flourish, Yet she maintained perspective through regular volunteer shifts, actually serving customers alongside her staff, preserving connection to the fundamental experience that had initiated this transformation, and reminding herself of both the dignity and challenges inherent in service work regardless of organizational structure. Marcus called during her brief lunch break, excitedly sharing news about his engineering internship interview with a Richards subsidiary developing sustainable transportation solutions for underserved communities. His academic excellence now matched by growing professional opportunities that would have remained inaccessible without the Foundation's intervention, yet his success ultimately stemming from his own intelligence and dedication, finally receiving appropriate recognition and support, rather than being squandered through financial limitation. The profound transformation of her circumstances sometimes still struck Tanisha with dreamlike quality during quiet moments, the trajectory of her life having pivoted so dramatically from that morning 6 months earlier, when simple human kindness toward a struggling stranger set in motion consequences beyond imagination. Her reflection occasionally glimpsed in the diner's polished surfaces, revealing someone simultaneously changed and unchanged. Her external circumstances completely transformed while her essential character remained consistent. The person who had helped Margaret read a menu amid financial desperation identical in moral compass to the woman now implementing systematic workplace reforms with substantial institutional backing. The Friday afternoon rush had subsided into the quieter lull preceding dinner service, when Tanisha noticed the young woman hesitating near the entrance, her worn backpack and anxious expression suggesting circumstances Tanisha recognized from personal experience rather than management training. With practiced discretion that preserved dignity above all else, Tanisha approached with professional warmth, escorting the newcomer to a corner booth where a complimentary glass of water and basket of fresh bread appeared without comment or expectation, creating space for whatever need had brought this stranger through their doors beyond mere hunger. The young woman introduced herself as Jasmine, her voice carrying the particular tension of someone navigating the treacherous territory between pride and necessity, as she carefully explained that she had recently aged out of foster care and was seeking any available position while attending community college, her carefully prepared resume extending across the table with slightly trembling fingers that betrayed the consequence of this moment in her precarious circumstances. Tanisha received the document with appropriate seriousness rather than charity, recognizing in Jasmine's determined self-sufficiency and carefully concealed vulnerability echoes of her own journey before the universe arranged its unlikely intersection of lives that transformed her path. Their conversation unfolded with growing ease as Tanisha shared the diner's innovative training program designed specifically for individuals transitioning between educational stages or life circumstances, explaining the flexible scheduling built around academic commitments, the mentorship component connecting staff with professionals in their intended fields, and the emergency assistance fund available to employees facing temporary financial crises. All features Tanisha had personally designed based on obstacles she had encountered during her own struggle to maintain forward momentum despite limited resources. Margaret and Alexander observed the interaction from their regular corner table, their weekly progress meeting momentarily suspended as they witnessed Tanisha guiding Jasmine through preliminary paperwork with the perfect balance of professionalism and compassion, neither minimizing the young woman's capability through excessive assistance nor abandoning her to navigate complex systems without support. Alexander noted with quiet satisfaction how Tanisha had integrated elements from their corporate onboarding protocols while adding humanizing components absent from typical business efficiency models, creating a hybrid approach that maintained practical effectiveness while addressing the whole person rather than merely their productive capacity. Her innovations already drawing attention from larger service industry operations interested in adapting similar practices. Margaret reached across the table with uncanny accuracy to touch her son's hand, a gesture connecting them through their shared recognition of Tanisha creating for Jasmine the same dignity-preserving experience that had catalyzed their unlikely connection months earlier, the cycle of compassion extending forward into new lives through systems specifically designed to facilitate rather than obstruct such human-centered interactions. As Jasmine departed with newfound hope visible in her straightened posture and scheduled interview for Tuesday afternoon, Tanisha rejoined the Richards at their table, the conversation resuming its focus on expanding their workplace dignity initiative to 3 additional locations within underserved communities, their collaborative vision extending the ripple effects of that original moment of kindness through intentional structures designed to facilitate similar transformations for others facing systemic barriers. The diner hummed with afternoon activity around them, staff members moving with the confidence of people receiving fair compensation for meaningful work, customers representing diverse socioeconomic backgrounds sharing space without the invisible barriers that typically segregated their city, local artwork from neighborhood youth programs adorning walls alongside professional installations, the physical space itself embodying the integration of compassion and commerce that their unlikely alliance had proven not only possible but sustainable through the complex intersection of Tanisha's innate humanity, Margaret's vulnerability, and Alexander's resources. The simple act of helping someone read a menu with dignity had expanded into concentric circles of positive change, demonstrating how transformation sometimes begins not through grand revolutionary gestures but through basic human decency maintained, despite inconvenience. The profound truth that kindness costs nothing yet catalyzes everything when offered without expectation of return, rippling outward through lives and systems with consequences exceeding our capacity to predict yet within our power to initiate through choices made in ordinary moments that reveal our extraordinary humanity.